Good morning and welcome to another episode of the program Issues That Matter, Greek and Turkish Dialogue podcast series. This is a podcast series supported by Friedrich Naumann Foundation and hosted by ELIAMEP. My name is Ioannis Grigoriadis. I'm one of two coordinators of this project together with Lale Alatlı. The Issues That Matter program aims to contribute to a better understanding between the Greek and the Turkish public opinions on issues and themes that resonate with the global political agenda. So what we're trying to do is to shift our attention from high politics, from political diplomatic confrontations, and look into a common agenda between Greek and Turkish public opinions that goes beyond the normal issues. So there have been podcasts focusing on information disorder. There have been podcasts focusing on sustainable development issues. Today, we'll have a podcast focusing on literature, and more specifically, the translation of Greek and Turkish literature. Greeks and Turks lived together for centuries, and next year we'll have the anniversary of the mandatory population exchange between Greece and Turkey, which meant that for the vast majority of Greeks and Turks, the possibility of coexistence ceased to exist. Of course, then literature plays a role, and translating Greek and Turkish literature became increasingly important as the number of bilingual Greeks and Turks was decreasing. So we have today with us two leading figures in the field of translation of Greek and Turkish literature. We have Ms. Anthi Karra. Thank you very much, Anthi, for being with us this morning.
I'm glad to be here.
And Ms. Lale Alatlı. Thank you very much, Lale, for taking the time to have this discussion with us this morning.
Hi, thank you.
So I will first open our discussion by raising the question, how did the translation of Turkish literature into Greek and Greek translation into Turkish started? I will start now with the first question. How did Greek translations and Turkish translations of literature of the other side started, and where we are today? So, Anthi?
Translation was instrumental in the project of constructing a modern Turkish national language and identity, as it had been previously instrumental in the project of westernization of the Ottoman Empire. Thanks to the creation of a translation bureau, which operated between 1940 and 1967, an amazing corpus of ancient classics as well as modern and contemporary authors were translated in Turkish, while this bureau set up certain standards regarding the act of translating, as well as the quality of the texts and the authors to be translated. These standards continued to shape the translating and publishing activity in Turkey long after the dissolution of this bureau. In Greece, on the other hand, although powerful and instrumental in the making of modern Greece and of modern Greek identity, the importance of translation has been rather silenced or rather buried behind the language problem, creating thus the paradox of a nation split between an official language, Katharevousa, forged by translation of Western legal, scientific, or literary texts, and a vernacular language, the Motiki, whose need, both in literature as well as a common to all national language, was first expressed in the Ionian Islands, which had never been under the Ottoman rule. Translation remained thus in Greece an individual affair, while in Turkey it was marked by an initial state initiative. These two different national trajectories have left their imprint on the choice of the translated authors and texts. For the time being, we can only tell the story of the translation of Greek and Turkish literature by looking at lists of authors that have been translated and books published in each country so far. I say books because literary reviews offer a somehow more interesting and true image, but of course they are destined to a more selective readership. I have tried myself to establish such lists, one for each language, and keep them up to date until recently at least. What these lists revealed to me is that a unilingual Turkish reader has a more complete, although very limited in number of texts, image of the roads traveled by the modern Greek literature writes from its start than his Greek counterpart for the more or less only 1 century long Turkish national literature. Very important Turkish writers, most of the women writers, Sevgi Soysal, Peride Celal, Nazlı Eray, and so on, not to mention the Turkish avant-garde writers, Oğuz Atay, Sevim Burak, who have already been translated in major European languages, are practically completely unknown in Greece. In the meantime, popular, rather bestseller writers are being abundantly translated. There are 2 questions one should ask here, at least from the Greek perspective, and that is, who decides what will be and what will not be translated, and who are those who translate from Turkish to Greek? I think that these 2 points have actually always been, for both the Greek and the Turkish side, largely interrelated, and this is how we come somehow to the political aspect of this subject.
Thank you very much, Anthi. So you're raising the question of the role of publishing houses. So who decides what is to be translated into Greek or Turkish, which of course helps shape an image of the country, because deciding on what is going to be read is quite important, and it sets certain priorities or maybe reveals certain approaches of the country.
Right.
So this is very important. And of course, the second question is, who is the translator? What sort of education, what sort of background he has, and how this informs his approach? I understand that, at least in the very first decades of the past century, the majority of the translators were refugees from Greece or Turkey, those who spoke the language not because they studied it in school, but because they were bilingual.
Right. Yes.
So how does this play a role? How does the fact that people come with this baggage into this profession and they mediate the 2 literary worlds?
Well, first of all, I have to say that it's worth seeing what happens abroad, for example, outside Greece and Turkey. Publishing houses are informed worldwide about the literature of a foreign country, either by people able to read the language or by foreign publication. Translation through a third language is, in this last case, quite often a solution if there are not enough translators available. It turns up that the use of a third language has been more frequent in Turkey than in Greece. Because, yes, it's a well-kept secret that the translation between these 2 languages was at the beginning in the hands of the Istanbul Greeks, to whom had been later added Turkish-speaking Greek refugees from Anatolia and Greek-speaking Turks, mainly from Crete. Foreign language literature departments in the universities of a country, which is the case in many European countries again, provide not only translators, but also critics who help somehow calibrate the quality of both the choice to publish or not an author and of the translation product. Greek literature in Turkey and Turkish literature in Greece have only recently acquired a place in the universities. They have already started providing us with translators, but not yet, as far as I am concerned, with critics of the books and the translations that are being published. So you see that if the product is not subject to a critic, then just everything can be published.
Thank you very much, Anthi. And this brings us to our second question, because you raised the possible topics can be translated into each language. What are the specific literature genres that have been preferred in translation? And I would like you to give the floor to Lale to tell us a bit about the situation in Turkey. What sort of Greek literature has attracted the attention of Turkish translators?
Thank you, Yanni. The Turkish readers had met very late the Greek literature. As Anthi referred before, it started mainly in 1940s with this Tercüme Bürosu, the translation office by the Turkish government after the Republic. And they started to translate mainly the Greek classic, ancient Greek classic books for many years. So this was the first contact of the Turkish readers with the Greek literature, it was the ancient Greek literature. So, and it continued until 1960s. And after they started to translate, not the translation office, but in general, some more modern books, modern classic, let's say contemporary about classics and poetry for the first time. But here there was the problem of the third language, as we said before. So many of these books were translated from English or from French. So it was a little bit a kind of a small problem in choosing which genres, because especially in English, if we think that only 3% of the books are translated from other languages, this was the main criteria. There wasn't so many choices. So there were Greek books translated from Greek to English or French, and from French and from English to Turkish. So this was the main criteria in these years. After 1980s until 1990s, there was a small pause. I believe that it was also the political situation in Turkey because of the army coup, and in general everything was frozen in the arts. And after 1999, after the two earthquakes happened first in Turkey and then Greece, so the politicians started to have another direction. Suddenly, there was a very big variety started in books, translated books from Greek to Turkish. And until now, of course, the politics affects a lot and the relationship of the two countries. But at the moment, one of the big criteria is the funds for translations given by the Turkish government or Greek government or other funds, private ones. So this is a main criteria for the publishing houses, because they get paid and the translators get paid of this. And of course, the commercial aspect of the books, this is also the choice of mainly of the publishing houses. So they prefer some books that they can earn some money. So this is another criteria at the moment. With more literature criteria, maybe we can find some pieces, poems, or short stories in literature magazines. I think there are more free and more literature-based criteria as they have.
Thank you very much, Lale. Anthi, what is
yes, what I can say is that realist literature was, with very few exceptions, preferred so far to literary fiction. But there is an opening to more demanding authors and texts the last 20 years. A particular emphasis has been given to historical fiction concerning the common late Ottoman past, but not only. Detective fiction has also started being more and more translated, as it has acquired a more visible place in both literatures. Magical realism has been represented in translations, so far as I can think, only by Latifete Ekin in Greece, while I don't think that Sirana Zateli has been translated in Turkish. I think that concerning the literature genres, this is all I can say. But yes, I agree completely with Lale that the criteria for publishing books are rarely literary, have rarely to do with literature. They are mainly commercial, unfortunately, which is not the case for the translation of literature of the different Western countries, not to mention, of course, the big literatures, English, French, German, and so forth. There, the criteria are more literary than commercial.
May I ask a question on this? So is this because the book publishers assume that there is enough interest in the Greek public for good English literature while they're not as certain about the same when it comes to Turkish literature? So they are less willing to take risks of investing on quality, and they're trying to find a popular author who is likely to sell for other reasons, maybe other than the literary quality of the text.
I think that the literature that has been published so far creates an image of the literature of the country. So if, for example, the Turkish classics are not known, if the good authors, authors of the 30s, for example, those who founded the Turkish novel are not known, Orhan Pamuk comes out of the blue suddenly. I can say, for example, I have noticed that after the Nobel Prize awarded to Orhan Pamuk, there have been more and more better authors that are translated in Turkey, because suddenly the Greek publishing houses realize that there is something in Turkey, in the Turkish novel, that we don't know. And even older writers have been finally published. Writers that had been published in French and in English or German 20, 30 years ago. This is one of the reasons why quality is different for the choice. I mean, the Turkish literature is very little known, actually. And the Greek publishers, as the Greek public, or they have helped the Greek public to find, to rediscover the Turk through his literature, but not the Turkish literature as something completely different and autonomous.
Lale, would you say that the same is valid in Turkey? So the same restrictions and the same limitations exist regarding the access of the Turkish public to Greek literature?
Mainly, yes, but there are some small differences, I think. I think the Greek literature is more well known in Turkey than the Turkish literature in Greece, because also there was because it started at the beginning with ancient Greek classics, so there was a really criteria for genres. I think it's a little bit well known.
So there is a discrepancy here that to some degree has contributed to better knowing modern Greek authors like Kazantzakis, or Greek authors that may have become prominent internationally and then have acquired some attention in Turkey as well. This brings me to our the final part of our conversation, which aims to discuss the role of social dynamics, politics, and socio-political struggles in the two countries. How have the vicissitudes of Greek-Turkish politics, Greek-Turkish relations, as well as domestic politics in Greece and Turkey affected the translation trends in the two countries? Lale, would you like to answer first?
Especially the political struggles affect the social dynamics, and then the translation trends, I think, especially for Turkey. But I think in general, in the countries where the art is not it's not very strong and powerful, it's more open to be affected by political struggles. So this we can see also in the translations from Greek to Turkish in Turkey. Actually, if we look to the translation trends, we can see the political struggles of Turkey, or the opposite. If we see the political struggles, it goes parallelly. So after the Republic, there is this effort with ancient Greek books, and after we can see from 60s to 80s again some efforts of more contemporary literature. In the 80s, we see nothing, because it was nothing in art in Turkey because of the political situation, and everything was so limited. I mean, also the power and the role of the translator, I imagine at that time, was very limited, with which words to use, not to use, and there were many trials about books. And after the earthquake, as I said before, there is this big variety of literature, of the Greek literature in Turkish. Of course, here we can see also in translation trends that these two countries, they have the celebration or national holidays on the days of the other country, which is a big disaster, let's say. So we have the same geography, same story, but totally oppositely. So this is also affects the translation trends, because really we are very similar but very different, I think, as to we Greeks or we Turks, let's say. I don't want to say the other. But so the translation trends with the politics, they started to destroy a little bit this imagination, this image of the other in the literature. So also at the beginning of the century, in the 1922 and 24, with exchange of population, we can see that especially in the Greek literature, this was the main topic for many, many years. And this is something that the Turkish readers can understand better than the other readers from other nations, because it's they lived something very similar to that. But still, I think there are very big gaps in translations of the two countries, and the political struggles still can affect all these trends.
Thank you very much, Lale. Anthi, what's your take?
First of all, I want to say that I don't consider literature and authors as innocent. Writing always conveys, in a complex way through fiction, a vision either of consenting to the social order or of denouncing it. Roland Barthes once said about writing that it is the choice of the social area in which the writer decides to situate the nature of his language. Now, if we think of that and we see what has been translated as Turkish, from the Turkish literature to Greece up to 1974, we realize that we have only three names: Nazim Hikmet, Aziz Nesim, and Sabahattin Ali, to whom we might add in the early 70s the name of Necati Cumalı. Apart from the fact that all three of them might be characterized as progressive, and in the case of Nazim Hikmet as openly communists, the texts that have been translated in Greek show them writing about common people and depicting them either as Anatolian peasants, either as small, ordinary city people full of humor, dignity, and malignity in an everyday life struggle, or as brave, patriotic people imprisoned for their ideas. A choice that doesn't necessarily characterize all their books, not to mention the Turkish literature of that time. And here it shouldn't be silenced, of course, that these translations were published mainly by leftists or those that were qualified progressive publishing houses, or even on the expense of the translator. That is, there was a silence to everything else, where this shows the domestic, actually, the importance of the domestic factor in the translation. Now, it's true that after the 1980s marked an important turning point, a wider interest for each other's literature. But then again, these are the years, as Lale also said, somehow of rediscovering the other. There is an emphasis on texts that have to do, on authors and texts that have to do with the common past, in a way, I would say, perceived as acceptable, if not favorable to the Greeks. And this common past has inspired and continues to inspire bestsellers in both countries. The 1990s, for example, introduced to Greece Ioannis N, a popular woman writer on the safe edge of an updated Kemalist feminism. Yashar Kemal and Orhan Pamuk brought in more contemporary Turkish, along with them, more contemporary Turkish writers like Perihan Mader, Muratan Mungan, Asli Erdoğan, Elif Shafak. Television series also encouraged the translation of some others. and very usually in a way to satisfy the very public of this television series. For example, Halit Ziya Uşaklıgil was translated only after Aşk-ı Memnu was presented in the Greek television. Well, these are all how the social life and the social dynamics influence on translation. Then there is another point that I have to underline here, is that it's not only the social dynamics and the politics can also be seen in the way translators translate. For example, the ethnocentric translation, which still largely prevails in both countries, introduces politics in the very heart of the matter in a quite insidious way. And this predominance of the ethnocentric translation has favored quite often, and still does somehow, a sort of voluntary censorship, whenever, of course, a censorship was not imposed by the very political situation of the state, as one could say that might be the situation today in Turkey, and as it has been already in Greece during the dictatorship. But it seems to me that translated Turkish literature in Greece offers to Greek society a mirror to reflect rather than contest herself, which is not necessarily true for translated Greek literature in Turkey, at least in what regards the Greek-Turkish relationship.
Could we say that the rapprochement that started about 20 years ago has contributed to a more balanced view of each other, or a view which is not only driven by the common historical experiences of the early 20th of the late 19th century? Lale, what do you think?
For more balanced, I'm not sure for the balance, but for sure we have more choices than before to choose or to read some books and to have to have some more ideas. So it's a kind of a small freedom, let's say, because I don't believe that it's balanced in total because of these criteria that we told before.
Yeah.
We said before. So it's not so literature based, but still it's a small step.
Mm-hmm.
I agree completely with Lale. I wouldn't say balanced, but of course there was an opening. It was a huge opening because suddenly we at least Turkish literature is not ignored, and even the good publishing houses, and I say good publishing houses, those that are considered that have been traditionally oriented only towards Western languages, feel the need now to start publishing Turkish literature because they recognize that there is a value in it, which they were not ready to see before.
So despite the fact that we haven't progressed as much as we could have or as we should, we can at least agree that some positive developments have taken place in the last couple of years. And of course, we do hope that this better understanding of each other can help overcome the kind of political or diplomatic crisis that have unfortunately come back to the Greek-Turkish political agenda in recent months. And I would like to highlight here, as we're concluding our discussion, that a number of opinion polls in Greece and Turkey have highlighted that Greeks and Turks do not perceive each other as enemies, despite the very aggressive and bombastic rhetoric that sometimes prevails in discussions on the public discussions in Greece and particularly in Turkey. So we can argue that maybe literature has made some contribution to that. So I think it's very important to highlight the role of bridges between the Greeks and the Turks, and translating literature has always been such a very important bridge. It can contribute even more to the future if like people in the field, like experts, translators, and publishers, of course, most importantly, realize the opportunity that translating the best literature of each other's into the other language brings for better understanding between the two peoples. So I would like here to thank very much Ms. Anthi Karra and Ms. Lale Alatlı for a very interesting discussion on the role of translation of Greek and Turkish literature in shaping the views of Greeks and Turks in Turkey and Greece. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank you as well for listening to this discussion. And please stay tuned for another podcast episode of the Issues That Matter series on Greek-Turkish relations. Thank you very much.
Thank you too.
Thank you.